Good afternoon, everybody. This is Arun Wadvani from Ingram Micro Cloud. I'm pleased to be running this webinar this afternoon, which is a continuation of our Ingram Micro Cloud Elevate series. Today, I'm excited to be talking to you along with my colleague, Rob Crane, who's a Microsoft MVP. And today, we'll be going through the introduction to Infrastructure as a Service, which, of course, is all about Azure. I'll just quickly take you through the agenda that we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about what is Azure, the licensing options around Azure, obviously using Azure, the key SMB scenarios that we hear from sort of our partners based on where we are today in our current journey. Ingram Micro Infrastructure as a Service, the framework that we like to follow with our partners. The Azure Acceleration Program that we've been running now for quite a while. We'll do a quick overview demo on the Ingram Micro Cloud Marketplace, and then we'll quickly touch on the upcoming events that we have running later this month, and then also we've got another session in June based around Microsoft 365. So just very quickly, just so everyone knows me, I'm based in Sydney and I look after the cloud sales team based obviously for Australia, and we'll be obviously go into a lot more detail about the Ingram Micro side of things afterwards. But I'm also keen to get you across Rob Crane, who's some of you would have heard from before. It's been an event that we've run over the last couple of years, and obviously he's very well respected within the industry. So Rob's going to take you through that introduction I've talked about, and then you'll hear from me again probably about half an hour or so, and we'll talk about some of the things that we're doing with Ingram Micro, and I'll give you an overview of the marketplace. So Rob, just checking that, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, ready to go. Thanks, Arun.
Fantastic, and over to you.
Excellent. All right, thanks for that. So our focus today is going to be around Azure. So Azure is obviously a Microsoft product, and the way to think about it largely is an extension or an add-on to stuff you're already doing with the Microsoft Cloud, typically around Office 365. Now, obviously, Azure is a very large environment, but what's the way we can boil this down to a very simple description? So the very simple description that I've come up with to describe what Azure is to say that it is your on-demand data center. Now, in that statement, there are two important points here. The first is your. So your data center can mean that it is you as a partner. You set up a production Azure environment, you then basically sell Azure services out of that to your customers. The customers have no idea, obviously, that it's coming from a Microsoft data center. You just bill them for the requirement. So good examples of this are the ability to provide DNS services. So if you have DNS that you're doing for Office 365 for your customers, you can do that inside Azure. Now, the benefit of doing, for example, DNS inside the Microsoft Azure environment is that you can configure, manage, and maintain all this, typically using PowerShell. So that means you can script it. So if you're doing a lot of DNS, Azure is going to give you that ability to script a lot of that and deploy that into a single environment to give you the managing and monitoring ability. Now, the your could also mean your customer's data center. So, for example, you can basically set up the customer with their own subscription to run Azure. Under the CSP program, you would receive the bill from Ingram, and then you would bundle it up with your services and white label it and then provide it to the customer. So the customer is, in fact, getting their own data center in which they can run virtual machines, they can run backup, they can run their DNS, and again, they're basically billed on demand. So what that means is that Azure services are billed as they are used. So you're not billed a flat rate per month as you would in Office 365. You're basically billed down to the second for a lot of Azure services. So for example, virtual machines, when you run them up, there's a cost for compute. That cost that you pay for compute is charged based on how long the virtual machine runs over the month. Now, if you're able to shut down that virtual machine for part of the month, then you won't be billed for the time that it is not running. So the second part here is that the billing when it comes to Azure is different from Office 365 in the fact it is on demand. You basically only pay for what you use. Office 365 is a flat fee per user per month, and Azure is very much a demand-based service. You pay for what you use, and again, that gives you the flexibility to be able to craft the services and the requirements to suit the needs. So if a customer needs a server or some storage for a temporary situation, rather than going out and purchasing that and having to worry about what happens afterwards, you can just spin up what you need, close down when you finish, you only billed for the time that you're actually using that. So what we're seeing in the cloud computing space is a move from the left-hand side of this diagram to the right. We start with the traditional on-prem packaged software where you are generally responsible for the networking, the storage, the servers, virtualization, all the way up to the application level. So that means you have to go out and buy the hardware. That means you have to go and get an operating system, install the operating system, configure the RAID array, install the operating system, and continue to manage, maintain it, and back it up over time. You're generally completely responsible for that environment. The first step into the cloud world is typically to go to Infrastructure as a Service, or IaaS. This is where Microsoft will look after the networking, storage, servers, and the virtualizations. They're looking after the physical layer for you. They're doing the hardware RAID 5. They're doing the host when it comes to virtualization. They're making sure that's up to date, it's patched, it's network available, it's fault tolerant, and so on. You generally then look after the operating system, the middleware, which is typically SQL, maybe, for example, runtime data and applications. So again, you don't have to worry about the physical hardware, but everything else you still have to look after and manage. The next step to the right is Platform as a Service. So again, this is an example where Microsoft is looking after the application, basically make sure it's load balanced, fault tolerant, and you're typically just worrying about the application and the data. The final step in the process is Software as a Service, where it's looked after end-to-end by the vendor. So the real world example here is, imagine an SQL server. So on-prem, you would have to buy the server, spec the server, put the RAM in the server, spin up the operating system, put SQL on there, get it connected, get it running, and then back it up on a regular basis. In Azure, basically, you wouldn't need to buy any hardware. You just spin up a virtual machine with Windows. You'd install SQL on there as well, but then you still need to manage, maintain, connect, do all that sort of stuff. Platform as a Service will be something like Azure SQL. So basically, all that means is putting your data into an Azure SQL service. The Microsoft will ensure that it is load balanced, it is fault tolerant for you, and again, it will generally do a lot of the backups as well for you. So you don't have to worry about this low level nitty gritty. Now, the Software as a Service would be just the front end, say on a web server that's consuming data from the database. So they're the examples as you move across the stack. Now, the way it's going is we're seeing a transformation from the left-hand side through IaaS, through PaaS, through to SaaS. So we need to be thinking about moving, again, some of our services, the ones that make sense, into IaaS, and then that's not going to be the end of our journey. We're going to need to look at a lot of these potentially going to Platform as a Service and also SaaS. Now, Microsoft basically has multiple data centers around the world. There are 50 regions in 140 countries. In Australia, we have now 4 data centers. There are now data centers in Sydney and Melbourne, and there are now 2 data centers in Canberra, which are particularly focused on the government market. Now, Microsoft has also announced data centers in South Africa, recently opened them in France, also opening them in the Middle East, and new ones are coming online in South Korea and India. So again, lots of investment from Microsoft to build these data centers and make the services available globally. Now, inside these data centers, you should see a lot of services that are very familiar to you. These are the Infrastructure as a Service. So these are virtual machines, these are storage, these are networking, VPNs, DNS, all that sort of stuff should be very familiar. This is based on the same technology as on-prem, TCP/IP, routing, all that good stuff, connectivity in servers, all the fun stuff we've done on-prem is now available as a service directly from Microsoft. The big difference here from a reseller or an IT pro's point of view is the fact that this is now all deployable with software. So we don't need to get our screwdrivers out and screw the data drives in and connect all this up. We basically can run this up through a web interface, or we can use a script that would allow us to replicate this environment quickly and easily. So if you have a solution, a service solution that works for a majority of customers, you can script that and automate that deployment. So the advantage of automation, it's going to give you the ability to replicate what you've built and potentially also outsource that. So rather than a high-level tech doing it, once they've developed the script, they can outsource that to lower-level techs to basically run and get the same result. So the way we're moving in infrastructure as a service is to automation, to scripting, to repeatable processes. So what you need to think about now is that every server on-prem that you've probably got is a little bit unique in the way it's set up, a slightly different BIOS, a slightly different disk array arrangement, slightly different updates, and unfortunately this causes us problems. Complexity causes us problems when we need to do standard things. So we need to move away from a world of treating computers like pets and look at them as cattle, right? They're there to do a job. We spin them up in a standard way. They do a standard job, and then if we need to add additional ones, we spin up the same server. So we're moving from a world of pets to cattle when it comes to infrastructure. Now, built on top of infrastructure, also available in Azure are the platform as a service. So some of the services you may be familiar with when it comes to platform as a service are things like Azure Active Directory. So the Active Directory that controls the users and logins for Office 365 is a globally distributed identity solution by Microsoft. This will give identities into Office 365 and also into Azure. Microsoft's looking after the hardware. Microsoft's looking after the domain controllers in the back end. All you need to do is consume the service. You'll also see that we have things like backup in here. We also have the ability to do web apps. So web apps are websites. One of the fastest growing areas at the moment is obviously the artificial intelligence, AI, but also the IoT, the Internet of Things. So we're going to see more and more devices connected to the internet, connected to environments like Azure. They're going to be streaming volumes of data into data centers, and we need to provide some analysis, some monitoring of these over the top. So a lot of that is not going to be possible on-prem. Only using large data installations like what we have here with Microsoft will be able to consume that information and also monitor it and make decisions on it. So as we see this explosion in growth, as we see the explosion in devices, we see that we're going to need the power of a data center to be able to do this and enable this, and also support systems that customers are requiring. So remember that Azure is built on standard infrastructure technologies, TCP/IP, routing, networking, all the stuff that you're familiar with. And then you've got the opportunity to also expand into areas that are based on PaaS that are going to give you the opportunity to have more flexibility and provide more solutions for the customer going forward. So if we focus on the IaaS, the infrastructure as a service, there are basically three major topics here along with the additional monitoring options. So at its core, IaaS is all about virtual machines. It is about spinning up one or more virtual machines to replace those items on-prem, and that is probably very familiar to a lot of people who are used to using things like Hyper-V and virtualization now. You can choose from a range of different servers in your environment, different power, different disks, different speeds, all sorts of things are available to you. So you can now craft a virtual machine solution directly to the need. Now, the other big advantage that using compute in Azure gives you is that one of the most common approaches to speccing out equipment on-prem has always been to use a factor of safety just in case, because the equipment on-prem has had to survive or had to keep going typically for at least 3. In many cases, we've now seen customers extend it beyond that, 3 into 5 and maybe 7 years. So what that's meant from a reseller's point of view is you generally have to take a guess at, I think this is what's going to be the expansion in the future. This is what I think we'll need for this system to last as long as possible. Well, in the Azure world, that's completely different, because we should be thinking about under-speccing our environment generally in Azure because it's so easy to upgrade. We can just go into a virtual machine, select a new size with a new capacity, Basically, the virtual machine then will reboot. It will then come up with that new environment. So if you have an environment that you think may need 32 gig of RAM or may need 16 gig of RAM, there's nothing stopping you maybe starting with 8, and then if that isn't sufficient, it's a very simple and easy process to upgrade. So again, think about turning this on its head when it comes to determining the specifications required. Remember that the data center is going to give us this flexibility to be able to use any resources and be able to bring them online very quickly. There's no buying hardware. There's no need to go out and source additional disks. They're there, ready, available for you to spin up almost immediately. Now, speaking of storage, we've got the ability to store our virtual machines, their images, the disks in a VHD, as we've always done on-prem. We can set that up in a number of different arrangements. So one of the arrangements that's preferred and to get the optimal performance in Azure is to use disk striping. That will give you the performance improvement, but many people would be concerned that striping isn't redundant. Yes, that is true, but what you need to appreciate with Azure, once again, the difference here is that underneath the covers, Microsoft's using hardware RAID 5 redundancy on the disk, all that sort of stuff. So they've taken away that worry, that security, that need to worry about that infrastructure redundancy. So that means that you're then free to give the performance focus on it for the server environment you create. Now, of course, you still need to do backups and things like that to protect the data as well. But from when you start crafting virtual machines, this again is a change here. We need to focus on the performance. The performance comes about, obviously, generally arranging our disk in a striping arrangement. Now, not only can we use hard disk, we've also got the ability to store general data in blob storage, and we've also got something called SMB file shares. So you can basically map a drive, a Z drive, to a location in Azure. It will appear as a file share on any machine connected to the internet, and you'll be able to copy files up and down there. Now, one of the good things about storage in Azure is we have a number of different tiers. So we have hot storage, we have archive storage, and we also have cool storage, and they have different pricings based on their access time. So you might, for example, want to set up an archive to, create a drive to an archive location, slower access, but again, the price is very, very low. Now, of course, we need to connect all this stuff together. We do that with our networking. So we can create networks within Azure. We can also create VPNs to information outside Azure. We can use ExpressRoute to give us a guarantee of quality across the links. We've got things like load balancers, DNS, and also traffic manager, which allows us to route traffic to different locations around the world, different machines based on the geolocation of requests that come in to those locations. Now, sitting over the top of this, IaaS as well as PaaS is the security and management option. So all of this information is basically creating logs, pushing those logs into the security management center that is part of Azure. We've also got the ability to run different sorts of backups over the top here. So we can do file backup, we can do disaster recovery, we can do site recovery. We've got lots and lots of options. Now, because it's your data center, you're basically accessing your data center, all of this is going to roll up into effectively a single console here. So the security center in Azure will give you an overview of all your virtual machines, all your blob storage, all the security in your networking, and let you know and give you suggestions as to what needs to be improved and what you need to take actions for. So rather than having to look through a range of different services, we can do this easily with a console. Now, one of the things to note here is that when we come to virtual machines here, you'll notice that the virtual machine here, a single virtual machine in Azure, has a 99.9% guaranteed uptime SLA, provided you build that on premium storage. So if you use premium storage in your Azure environment, because there is premium and standard storage as an option, premium is a little bit more expensive, but if you do spin up a virtual machine using premium storage, you will get a 99.9% SLA uptime, which is something that is going to be virtually impossible to be able to do on-prem. So this is, again, a differentiation you can bring to people who are concerned about uptime on their servers without having the need to go to duplicate servers. Now, if you want, you can obviously create availability sets that will, again, protect against failures in a single rack inside a data center. Again, that'll give you a higher SLA. You can also then split those availability sets across availability zones, so you can put the servers to be redundant in different data centers and make sure that they are redundant. And again, to guard against the Godzilla attack that takes out a complete region, you can do the multi-region environment as well. So we compare our regions when it comes to our compute. So we've got lots and lots of options here. Now let's turn and have a look at some storage. So the second component for our IaaS environment, which is very common, is our storage. Now, typically we've talked about disks, files, and blobs. So disks allow persistent storage for VMs. We've got the option, as I've mentioned, for premium storage, which are SSD based. We've also got standard disks, which are based on mechanical disks. So again, they are cheaper, but they do have slower access times. We've also got the ability to do a fully managed file share in the cloud using Azure File Share. We can map to that on Macintoshes, PCs, servers that support SMB3 shares. Again, this is going to really make the ability to, again, migrate data, to backup data, to also provide archiving nice and easy. We just map a network drive and away we go. And again, if you need something that's a bit more general, you can use blob storage. That will allow you to access via a HTTP or a REST request. And again, we've got a lot of different options there. We've got the cool tier, we've got page blobs, we've got append blobs, so you can again feed things like logs into them as well. Now, Azure Storage does extend beyond that. We've got something called tables. So tables, again, think of them like log files that are storing big spreadsheets. Again, very good for non-SQL type storage. Again, that's an option. Also, queues. Queues provide the ability for us to move data between Azure services quickly and easily without them having to be connected. So we can put information into a queue from one Azure service, send it to another Azure service, and again, get the connectivity between the two. So remember that we have all of this built into our Azure environment, and we can take advantage of that across our machines and again, with all our users. So what we've got here when it comes to networking, we've got support for IPv4 and V6. We can have multiple network cards. We can do public or private IPs, static or dynamic. So again, if you want to go to a static IP, you can do that in Azure. We've got network security groups, which are basically firewalls, but again, we can program those using things like PowerShell to make sure they're consistent. We can do DNS, we can manage that from Azure, or we can manage that externally. And we've also now got the ability to do things like accelerated networking, and again, we can persist things using our MAC address here. Now, on top of all this, the compute, the storage, and the networking, we've got this management layer. So we've got our Azure Active Directory that's going to be the same identities from Office 365, that's going to give us consistent identity across our environment. We've got the Azure Security Center, which will again roll up all the threats, all the detections, all the responses, and give you a single pane of glass. The log analytics is going to collect all the information, logs from servers, logs from storage, and allow you to query those and observe what's going on. We've got our backup ability. So again, we can back up virtual machines, we can back up disks, we can back up files, and we can do a lot of options there. And the way it all works generally is around what's called an Azure Resource Manager. So an Azure Resource Manager is a bucket with which you put things like storage, virtual machines, and whatnot. So you could have a Azure Resource Manager container for one customer, an Azure Resource container for a second customer. You can assign different rights between those two containers. So some staff can get to one area, other staff can't. So this is the concept of software-defined networking now. Now, one of the cool things that Microsoft does give you is something called the Azure Advisor. You can run this across your environment, and it will then let you know where that you could potentially be making saves. It will indicate that maybe you've overspec'd a machine, or the disk probably isn't performing to the level it should be. It will again give you options, give you suggestions to improve your environment and again minimize the costs across that environment. Now, for those users who are worried about taking their information to the cloud and using keys provided by vendors, it is possible for you to bring your own key, or the customer to bring their own security key, and effectively encrypt everything that is in Office 365 and also in Azure if you so desire. But remember that with great power comes great responsibility. If you take on that management of the keys, then you are totally responsible for that. There's nothing Microsoft can do to recover the information if there is some sort of corruption at your end with the key. Now, the other thing, if you haven't looked at Hyper-V replication, that's the ability to replicate virtual machines between servers. We can use Azure to do that as well. So we can use Hyper-V replication from on-prem to Azure, Azure to Azure, and then outside in between Azure regions. So you could replicate between the Australian region and European region as well. That means that if you do get a failure, you'll be able to spin up a machine really quickly, because again, it's basically making sure that any changes on one are replicated immediately to the next. So there's a huge amount of stuff there. There's a huge amount of opportunity. There's a huge amount that can be done to replace or to supplement what's already on-prem. Now, the question is, how do we license all this? So there are three typical ways of licensing it: pay-as-you-go, which is a credit card down, and the billing is done against the credit card. There's the older licensing program, open licensing program, where you basically purchase tokens, you ran the tokens down, and then you added more tokens. So again, think of a prepaid environment. That does lack a certain amount of flexibility, and that's why we came up with the CSP program. So much like the Office 365 CSP environment, you can do CSP via Azure. So the idea there is you can white label, bill a customer for the usage. You'll receive one bill for all your customers directly from Ingram, and then you can break that up, add your services, and bill it as you see fit to your customers. Now, the important thing to remember with the CSP program as well is that not only are you the first point of contact for the accounts for the billing, but you are also the first point of contact for support. So again, remember that with the CSP program, it is important that you understand the support requirements, have those in place, and are able to escalate those, typically through Ingram, who will then escalate them to Microsoft if required. So how do we go about working out the costs of what Azure is going to be? It's an on-demand system. We can't provide exact figures because that will vary month to month, but we can use the public-facing Azure calculator. We can go in there. If you haven't used that, basically what you need to do is go in there to the URL that's specified, and then you then nominate the workloads you wish to price out. They'll be added to your calculation sheet, and then you put in the pricing and the timing. So for example, what we've got here is a virtual machine. So you'll see that I've selected to add a virtual machine. I've picked a D8S V3, which has 8 CPUs and 32 gig of RAM. And you'll notice that I've specified a region because, again, prices vary between regions in Azure. The operating system I've also had to nominate because Azure supports Windows and other operating systems like Linux and so on. And then I can choose whether I want to be billed including the OS, or I want to include something like SQL as well. So if you want to bundle in the operating system and something like SQL, you can certainly do that. Then I select the tier, and there's the instance D8 V3. Now under the billing options there, you'll see that we now have the ability to have reserved instances. So we can pay as you go, so that's just a casual rate. We can lock in an instance for 1 year and basically save around 21%. And we can also lock it in for 3 years and potentially save 33%. Now we nominate how many virtual machines we have, and one of the things you can't see here is, again, we can also specify time. So as I mentioned before, it's an on-demand data center. The idea here is you can also, if you want, configure it so that it only runs for a certain amount of time a month. So let's say, for example, you have a non-priority server that could be shut off maybe over weekends. And that's going to save you about 25%. And if you need to do that, you can use automated scripting to initiate a shutdown, initiate a power on if required. So again, have a look at the Azure pricing calculator, build out some standard options, and then basically that will make it easier for you to give customers an indication of what the pricing is going to be. Now, remember, it's an on-demand environment, which means that you'll only pay for exactly what you use. That's going to give you the flexibility, especially over time, make it easy to upgrade or scale back if needed. The customer only pays basically for what they use. So one of the many common requests we see out there is, okay, how do I get into this Azure? How do I start using it? Well, The good news is for most partners who have at least Action Pack, you're going to receive free credits as part of your Microsoft partner benefits, and you'll get this slide deck afterwards, and you'll be able to see how you can use these credits. So these credits will renew every month, allow you to run virtual machines, do some backups, get a feel for it, and again, these videos will show you how to activate that and step through. And as I mentioned, they will renew every month. And remember that as a partner, you may also get additional credits around Office 365, CRM, EMS, those sort of things as well. So again, there's a link there for you to have a look at and see exactly what benefits you're receiving as a Microsoft partner. So how do we start using Azure? What's some good scenarios here? So the most common scenarios we see in SMB are data backup, disaster recovery, deployment of our VMs, and hosting websites. So they're typically the best place to start. If you want to back up a server, you can back up files and folders. You can back up things like SQL. This is going to give you offsite backup. It's going to give you encrypted backups into a vault of your nomination, whether that's Australia, whether that's overseas. You can then replicate that to different regions around the world if you want additional redundancy around that. And again, it's basically a hardware cost. And remember that the billing is consumption. So in this case, the consumption just is storage. So all you bill for is the storage. And obviously, as that increases over time, there will be a slight increase in charge. But remember, the backups here are generally differential. So again, initial large backup if needed, and you can ship this to Microsoft. And then from there, it will be differential as well. So we can also take that step further and do disaster recovery. So disaster recovery is site recovery. So basically it will allow us to replicate a complete virtual machine host, guest from on-prem to the cloud, from the cloud to the cloud, from an Azure region to another Azure region. A lot of this is also built directly into virtual machines without the need to worry about on-prem infrastructure. So if you haven't done Hyper-V replication on-prem, which is really what this is based on, I certainly recommend you have a look at it, but it's even easier when you do it in Azure. So what this is going to give you is going to give you basically a complete standby copy of the server because it's replicating on a regular basis. You can also set it up so that when the target server fails, or if the target server fails, then the backup will automatically spin up. With the right configuration, the users won't even generally notice that there's been something wrong with the server. So it really gives you that assurance that a real standby hot version of the server is available to you. And again, you can use Azure as the recovery point, or you can use Azure as the transitory point, maybe through to another offsite location if you want. So again, we've got the options here with our data to manage the growth in data. We can store stuff in Azure with our SMB file shares. We can copy off stuff. We can move it to locations. A great example I've used is moving things like photos. We have clients that take lots and lots of photos. They don't make much sense going in something like SharePoint because they're not indexable. Therefore, we move them off into something like Azure where they can be easily recovered and copied if required. You can back up, so remember you can back up servers, you can back up workstations, you can set up the ability to back up from clients' desktops as well into an Azure recovery vault. And then at the high level, you can also do the disaster recovery, which is the constant recovery of servers using Hyper-V replication, which is, again, something I'd recommend everybody have a look at. Another option that a lot of people do provide is websites. So Azure has its own web hosting service. You can do it on IaaS. You can run up a virtual server if you want, but a smarter move will be to do it in Platform as a Service, PaaS. And again, the advantage of doing that in PaaS is that it's going to be something you can script, you can run, you can, again, make it a very easy deliverable on a regular basis, manage it all through a single console in Azure. So again, it is possible to host websites, whether in infrastructure or in PaaS, and that's going to give you a lot of flexibility when it comes to scaling and connectivity to third-party services like SQL databases. Now, one of the other things to think about here is that our on-demand data center is going to give us the flexibility to extend our on-premises environment. Now, the way that we do that typically is we implement Office 365, we build or add an Azure subscription into Office 365 to extend that and allow us to create, for example, the site-to-site VPN. Once we have a site-to-site VPN between our on-prem environment, that means the networks are basically the same. We can then start shifting workloads from on-prem to the cloud. So we may choose to move an on-prem server into the cloud. We may, for example, decide to set up an Azure AD Connect server, a member server in Azure, to do our synchronization from our on-prem AD. But once we've got this environment, we can then start moving workloads either way as required. It gives us the flexibility to be able to do this on demand as required. And again, my advice would generally be for every Office 365 installation that you look at selling an Azure subscription as well, because remember that until you start using until the customer starts using the Azure subscription, there'll be no charge. So again, I would certainly set up the Azure subscription initially, probably use it for DNS, set up a site-to-site VPN, which is not going to cost you very much at all, and then you're going to have this flexibility to do what you want. So that's exactly the place to start, I would suggest, when you're looking at what's available for customers, combined with all the services of Office 365 as well. So as I mentioned, you'll get the slides afterward. Lots of resources here. Again, speak to the people at Ingram for more information. But I think with that, it's time to hand back over to Arun.
All right, thank you very much, Rob. Good job there. Thank you for taking us through that program. I see we've already got some questions coming into the chat box. I'll quickly go through the overview of the marketplace and some things that I was going to cover, and hopefully leave us all sufficient time to answer the questions that come through. In the meantime, feel free to start sending it into the chat box, and if we don't get to all of them at the end, we will go back to everybody individually that has raised them, obviously, so we can answer any questions that you have as part of, obviously, this session. So just very quickly, I'm going to just talk about the infrastructure lifecycle framework. So essentially, this is our 9-step framework that provides solutions, tools, and expertise. It's basically right the way through from the partner recruitment side. It includes components around training, helping you around demand generation, and pieces together those components around thought leadership, marketing collateral, obviously campaigns and events that we can run with you. We take you around opportunity qualification, and also how you scope the requirements for your customer, discovery and consultation, whether that be technical, it could involve infrastructure, solution architecture and design. We can help you around components around proposals, quotes and presentations to your clients, deployment, configuration, orchestration, testing, migration, and obviously project management is all part of the scope, and then operational as well, including billing consolidation, subscription management, and obviously piecing all that together for you. So it's quite a comprehensive program. Any of my team will be happy to take you through that in a lot more detail. Some of you may also be familiar with our technical Azure specialist. His name is Deep. That's no sort of pun on his name, of being obviously a deep and complex solution. He just happens to have that name. So feel free to work with the sales team, obviously, if you want to know more about how all of that works. And obviously, we'll be pleased to help you with any questions you have around that particular framework. So Azure acceleration. So Easy Azure is packages to assist you around things like Easy DR, backup, Easy DB SQL, Easy File Server, Easy Active Directory, and Easy Web Server. Now, Rob's already covered a lot of those areas already, but our particular package solution offerings there, we've got all 12 offerings that come into those 6 different packages I've covered. And by all means, the sales team will be very happy to obviously go through that in a lot more detail with you. The Microsoft Azure, we have a program that we run on a regular basis. All of the information is available here on our website, which is ingrammicrocloud.com/Microsoft-Azure. So we can take you through an introduction of what is Azure, talk to you about those components around the Accelerate program, including customized training, which obviously can be we can provide you recommendations on how you go through those, and then we reward you with points and sales as obviously you get up to speed on each of those components. So again, feel free to work with my team around any of those components. So I'll just take you very quickly through the marketplace. I won't spend too much time on this because I realize that the majority of the people on the call would have already be familiar with our solution. But where we're trying to go with the marketplace was trying to make it as easy as possible with the minimum number of clicks to get where you need to. So we're very, very keen on minimizing the time it takes for you to actually deploy your services on Azure with resource templates, help you around the enhancement around the billing components, and the ease of use and management all around the customer control panel. So we're basically trying to give you the ability, the term that's used here is power to the people. We're trying to make it as easy as for you to actually get on board and get behind this, and obviously accelerate your business moving forward. You'll see there in the marketplace when you first go in there on the right hand side, we've got the Microsoft Azure. It's simply just clicking on that square box over there. That will take you into the enablement Microsoft Azure component. You just simply click on the next component. We're going to look at then clicking on the Azure. And then we look at the enablement components, and that gives you there obviously all of those pieces. And then from there, you then click on whether you want to add the subdomain, and that then takes you into the deployment resources, looking obviously on how your usage, whether you want to do the administration, and look at obviously the pricing. And then I mentioned about the one-click deployment. So you just deploy resources, the Microsoft Azure portal, take you into each of those components again. There's the templates that you can upload to obviously to make it much easier for you. We typically recommend that you go with the recommended templates to make your life easier, especially when it's your first time, obviously when you're doing this. Just select the file from the recommendations. You'll see from that screen there, those are the components that come up as part of those resource templates. Continue going through there. You can add in your resource group name, obviously the region that you're deploying it, and then complete any of the parameters required around your user admin, the DNS, password, etc. to get that underway. And we also move from there then to the enhanced Azure billing. So the administration, you can decide whether you want to set up email alerts and subscriptions. We can configure the email alerts by budgeting the overview. So obviously, so if you want to put a cap on your customer so that you get notified when they reach a certain level, then you've got an idea that's coming through without getting obviously bill shock down the track. We also then have the daily resource usage. You can track those reports, download the CSV file that sits in there, and that will then provide you a really good overview of where you are billing with that particular customer, and obviously then you can bill them accordingly based on this particular report. Also, just in case, a lot of you I know will be using platforms like ConnectWise and Autotask. So also within the cloud marketplace, we have the identity sync, or it's called ID Sync for short. That allows your integration with Active Directory, Office 365, and now the newer technology, which is Microsoft 365. This helps you around your billing. It helps you reduce that complexity once you've got the investment around Active Directory and leveraging that, and just simplify your billing process to your clients. Obviously, again, if you need more help around that, feel free to reach out to any of the team. Azure promotions, we've got some good promotions out in market at the moment, up to $2,000 cashback. Obviously, any sales that you have coming through, that's currently running through to the end of June. The minimum consumption is $300 per month, and we'll actually give you back $300 there as well. There's the Azure consumption, so you need obviously that subscription to continue for the first month, $1,000 plus. Second month also $1,000 plus, and third again also. So some great incentives there. Obviously, we're keen to help you around how you can maximize your earning potential with Microsoft. So take advantage of those, obviously, if you can, before the end of June. So those of you would have probably also seen we're running some connected workshop over the next couple of days. We've got Sydney running this Thursday, and we've got next week Melbourne and Brisbane. These are going to be an opportunity here on connected workplaces. It's the first time we've done these. You're going to be hearing not just from Microsoft, you'll also hear from leading vendors like Dropbox for Business, ConnectWise I've talked about also with the ID Sync components, NetConnect around managing your virtual desktop environments with NetConnect, which is also now on the marketplace. It's one of the recent additions to the services that we have on the marketplace that links in nicely with the Microsoft story. And lastly, you'll get an opportunity to hear what's happening in the world of NBN as well. I know NBN have been very focused previously around what they're doing with the consumers, but they've now identified that there's a lot of work to be done around educating the opportunity around leveraging the newer technologies that NBN presents around fiber and some of the advantages that new infrastructure will provide around overall service. So it's a great opportunity to get on board. Feel free to come along. Register for Sydney if obviously you can make it this Thursday. We're pleased to see you. The venue is now Sheraton on the Park. We recently just had a venue change based on the demand has been so high that we've actually had to change the venue to cater for the additional registrations that we've seen come through this week. So feel free to come along to that one. And we're running Melbourne on the 22nd of May and Brisbane on the 24th. So come along and hear our messaging around how all that will come to play. Lastly, our next webinar in this series, the Cloud Elevate June next webinar will be around the Microsoft 365 and IT simplification. So feel free to come onto our website and register for that one as well. And we can get you across the world of Microsoft 365 as well. Okay, so that's it for me as far as the slides. Now we do have some questions that have come through. So I'll just go back to the beginning. So Rob, feel free to step in as well, obviously, as I ask these as they come through. Should we be using the CSP for each customer or all under our own? I'm not quite sure I fully understand that question.
No, I know what they're talking about. So basically, what you've got is you've got the option here, right? So if you're a partner, you can spin up a production in Azure yourself and you can provide services out of that, or you can add Azure subscription to a partner and that's their own data center, right? So in general, the way I would define it is if you have a customer who has Office 365, who is looking to expand or to move their own infrastructure away from on-prem, then you would put the Azure services inside their Office 365 environment, basically. So you combine the two there. If you had a customer who's probably not going to change, not looking to do Office 365, just wants to consume the old server or the odd bit of storage, then again, you do have the option of providing it out of your own production tenant. However, again, the whole idea here is the flexibility is yours to choose what makes sense for you. But in general, I would be suggesting that probably the best option is to provide a separate Azure tenant for every customer that you deal with.
Okay, great. Next question. How to set up the file folder permissions on file server in Azure?
Okay, so there's lots of different ways to do files and folders in Azure. I'd also be suggesting you need to look at files and folders and its replacement in things like SharePoint Online, Teams, OneDrive, and Office 365. The easiest answer to this question is basically create a site-to-site VPN, and that would allow you to spin up a virtual machine, virtual server in Azure. That would then be connected to the local domain on-prem, and then it's just like any other server. So a server in a virtual machine in Azure is just like any Windows server. You join it to the domain, it will then allow you to apply permissions to the files and folders area. And again, there are additional options around SMB file shares, and something called Azure Sync as well is also in there. So lots of different ways, but it's easiest way, site-to-site VPN, virtual server in Azure connected to the on-prem domain controller, and then it's just like a server on-prem.
Okay, great. Next question. How do you recommend replacing an on-premise file and print server with Azure while keeping traditional controls and management like NTFS security, DFS, ABE, and map drives on that client?
So in a lot of cases, this can be moved into the newer environments in Azure controlled by Azure AD. But again, the first step in the process I would suggest is a site-to-site VPN that would give you the flexibility to extend some of these services into the cloud. So If you create a site-to-site VPN to your on-prem environment, then you could run up a single server. That server could be a member server, could be a domain controller, could be a DFS server, could do whatever you want, and then you extend it from there. So at the end of the day, the starting point for most infrastructure migrations is a site-to-site VPN, giving you the connectivity to Azure. Then you can leverage Azure AD, Office 365, Azure file shares, blob storage, and so on. So again, it's not a matter of replacing it, it's a matter of giving you that maximum flexibility. And the point where that starts is typically a site-to-site VPN.
Okay, great. Okay, I don't think we've got any more questions that have come through so far. I'll just give it another minute or two in case we do see any more questions pop up in the chat box. Okay, it looks like we've got all the questions that have been raised have now been answered. Feel free, obviously, if you have any additional questions to contact any of the sales team. You can go on to the ingrammicrocloud.com.au website if you'd like to get any more information, or feel free to reach out to any of the sales team should you have any questions about what you've heard today, or obviously would like to know more about how you start your journey with Azure. Thank you for giving us your time this afternoon. I really appreciate it's an hour of your time, but hopefully you've got some value from today. And if you also need any help around Azure, feel free to reach out to me or any of my team. Thank you so much and good afternoon.